Let's continue with this theme right now, as Mboweni has been remembered as a committed public servant who gave the best years of his life serving the people of South Africa. We speak now to former Business Unity South Africa President, Professor Bonang Mohale. Prof, good to have you on the program despite the circumstances today. I want us to begin with your personal reflections on the man that is Tito Mboweni. What are your memories with the former minister, and how did he influence you?
So first, I think sincere condolences to his family, to his clan, to his colleagues, and to his family and comrades. My memories of him are many and varied, all of them good, positive, building and creating rather than tearing down and destroying. A lot of us would remember him for giving us the best productive years, 30 years of his life when he was a public servant. But very few of us would remember that he was actually more active much earlier than that. His days in Lesotho, when he was still an activist, where he studied at the now National University of Lesotho, where he even met the love of his life, married a Mosotho me, and they had children. But also at the time that he headed up the ANC youth desk, at the same time that Ralph Mgijima was heading up the ANC health desk. At that time, we were young COSAS members. I was a medical rep in the pharmaceutical industry, and I used to drive to Lesotho every 6 months just to go and visit on the pretext that, of course, I am working. Worked with him very closely when he then became the first minister of the Department of Labor. I was at the Black Management Forum at that time. In one day, we gave him 17 BMF members to go and build capacity in the very first Department of Labor. Amongst the well-known, respectable South Africans will be Ntate Mpho, will be Ntate Loyiso Mbabane, who took over from Ntate Mpho. At that time, we were having regular conversations with him. We had written the employment equity predecessor, and we called it the affirmative action legislation as a proposal to government. We came up with the Basotho formula as our attempt at Black economic empowerment. And he persuaded us because we were very insistent and persuasive. He said, I understand this affirmative action thing. We've been working on it since the 70s. How about if we called it what it is ultimately going to be, starting with the end in mind? Hence, the legislation became known as employment equity, because equity was the intent, whereas affirmative action was the journey, indeed the process. He went on to become, of course, Minister of Finance, having been the first Black governor of the South African Reserve Bank. Fond memory is at the time that in the BMF, there was a raging war of succession, as these things normally happen with Black people. Menolita Fagude, who was the very first female president, was then challenged by Mzwanele Chimimani. He called us to the 22nd floor of the South African Reserve Bank, where he was trying to mediate and make peace, to say, as Black people, we are fighting for the same thing. Surely there ought to be common cause. At that time, he was joined by the then late Maduke Lotin Lovu, Ubabu Sotobe, Begesibia, Mefuti Mutoba, but also Memutlanalo, Gloria Kumalo. We tried to make some sense prevail. It wasn't to be, but it never really stopped him from having a very close, personal, intimate relationship with the BMF. So yesterday at about maybe 17:30, I was at the 45th birthday celebration of my boss, Usis Nompumelelo Tembekile Madisa, at the Shongwes, the Hook Country Hotel, when we heard the news that the family has been summoned to go by his bedside to really make what was going to become a very difficult decision. And then later on, just before we went to bed, that's when we heard that he has been called up to higher order. So we are eternally grateful for many things that he has bestowed and bequeathed this country, the least of which is not the fact that he's one of the very few of the first 400 MPs that were appointed by President Rolihlahla Nelson Mandela. No less than 5 of them who were below 40 years of age, including the then Minister Trevor Manuel, but also the other colleagues like Fraser Muleketi at that time. But also for the fact that in 30 years, when greed had set in and state capture was the order of the day, up until today, the same way with our first democratically elected President Rolihlahla Nelson Mandela, we can't trace 2 cents into his pocket that went there because of state capture, bribery, stealing, or cheating, or just old-fashioned corruption.
Professor Mohale, as we get to the butt end of our conversation, what message would you like to convey, especially to the public, about the importance of honoring Mboweni's contributions in our society?
First, to say labor and all the workers owe him a debt of gratitude. He pushed very hard to make sure that we have workers' rights as enshrined in our constitution today. Basic Conditions of Employment Act, the Employment Equity Act, as I said, but also just to make sure what does it mean to be a worker in the face of violent and fierce opposition from business at that time. Every single solitary one of these progressive laws, workers had to go on strike to be able to notch them as a victory. That's why they ought to be indeed protected with our lives. But also he will be remembered as somebody who protected the independence of the South African Reserve Bank. He brought in the monetary policy, the fiscal discipline that we have. He will be remembered as somebody who had the courage of his conviction to speak his mind, even if everybody in the room disagreed with him. He never really shied to make sure that you understood where he was coming from. He loved debate, he loved to argue, and he always shared dispassionate facts, because all of us at that time knew that facts one can't deny, but truth one can apply.